Now, a little success. Soon you will fall down. Look out, or you will lose your head. Go steady. John D. Rockefeller expressed that in his autobiography, cautioning himself not to become overconfident after achieving early success. David Senra, host of the podcast Founders, by the way, one of my favorite podcasts, I highly recommend it, expressed that sentiment as, if you go to sleep on a win, you'll wake up with a loss. It's a warning about one of the most dangerous moments any business can experience, success. Success can make us believe we've figured everything out. It can convince us that customers will always remain loyal, that our brand is stronger than our mistakes, and that the methods responsible for yesterday's success will continue working tomorrow. Few companies demonstrate that warning better than Schlitz. Imagine spending more than a century building one of the most recognized and trusted brands in America. Your product is so popular that your company becomes one of the largest producers in the world. Your name is known in nearly every household. Your slogan,
when you're out of Schlitz, you're disaster. You're out of beer, Schlitz,
becomes part of American culture. Then imagine losing it all, not because a competitor invented a revolutionary new product and not because customers suddenly stopped wanting what you sold. You lose it because you quietly changed the very product that made you successful. At first, the changes seem small. You find a faster way to make it. You substitute a few ingredients. You shorten part of the production process. Every decision saves a little money and improves a financial matrix. But customers begin noticing that something isn't quite right. The product doesn't taste the way it used to. The quality becomes inconsistent. Then customers begin finding something floating inside the bottles. By the time management realizes what's happening, the brand's greatest asset, the trust of its customers, is already disappearing. This is the story of Schlitz, the beer that made Milwaukee famous, and the series of decisions that made Schlitz infamous. Welcome to Reluctant Lessons, where we examine some of the most consequential business failures in history and uncover the lessons every entrepreneur and business leader can learn from them. I'm Mike Konrad. The Schlitz story began in Milwaukee in 1849 when August Krug opened a small brewery and tavern. Joseph Schlitz, who had been working as the brewery's bookkeeper, eventually took control of the business and placed his name on it. The company's first great opportunity came after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The fire destroyed much of Chicago, including many of its local breweries. Schlitz responded by shipping beer from Milwaukee into the devastated city. That helped Schlitz expand well beyond its Wisconsin roots. Over the following decades, the company developed a national distribution network and became one of the most powerful names in American brewing. By the beginning of the 20th century, Schlitz was reportedly the largest brewery in the world. Its famous slogan, "The beer that made Milwaukee famous," wasn't an exaggeration. Schlitz was so closely associated with Milwaukee that it even influenced popular culture. In the 1970s sitcom Laverne and Shirley,
Make our dreams come true.
the two title characters worked at the fictional Schatz Brewery, a playful reference to Schlitz. Schlitz wasn't simply selling beer. It was selling consistency, familiarity, and trust. Customers knew what they would get every time they ordered one. That trust helped Schlitz survive Prohibition, economic downturns, wars, and intense competition. By the middle of the 20th century, Schlitz and Anheuser-Busch were competing for leadership of the American beer market. Schlitz had spent generations building an extraordinarily valuable brand, but as sales volumes increased, so did the pressure to produce more beer, produce it faster, and produce it at a lower cost. That was when efficiency began to take priority over the product. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, Schlitz made a series of changes to its brewing process. The company reportedly replaced some malted barley with corn syrup, used less expensive ingredients in certain areas, accelerated fermentation, and shortened the amount of time required to produce each batch. These changes allowed Schlitz to make more beer in less time. From a purely operational perspective, that probably looked like progress. Production increased, costs declined, capacity improved. But efficiency is only an improvement when the customer continues to receive the same value. Schlitz's customers didn't. The flavor began to change. Consistency suffered. The beer also became more vulnerable to spoilage. No single change may have seemed catastrophic. That's what makes this story so important. Schlitz didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy its beer. Management made a series of individual decisions, each which may have appeared reasonable when evaluated by itself. Use a slightly less expensive ingredient, reduce the brewing time, increase the fermentation temperature, add something to prevent cloudiness, remove something else that might have to be disclosed on the label. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Each change delivered a measurable benefit, but when those changes were combined, the product was no longer the product customers had trusted. This is something anyone who works in manufacturing should understand. We frequently talk about process drift. One small process change might not produce an obvious failure. A second change might remain within acceptable limits. A third might also seem harmless, but stack enough small changes on top of one another, and eventually the output no longer performs the way it once did. That's exactly what happened to Schlitz. One of the company's most damaging problems involved the ingredients it used to keep the beer clear. Schlitz had been using silica gel to prevent a cloudy appearance known as chill haze. When the company became concerned that it might eventually have to disclose the additive on its labels, it switched to a different filtering agent. Unfortunately, that agent reacted with another stabilizing ingredient in the beer. Under certain conditions, the reaction created flakes or a mucus-like substance inside the container. The material reportedly wasn't dangerous, but that really wasn't the point. Customers were opening bottles of beer and finding something floating inside them. Schlitz attempted to manage the problem quietly, but customer complaints increased, sales began to fall, and the company eventually recalled approximately 10 million bottles and cans at a reported cost of $1.4 million. While that financial cost was significant, the reputational cost was far greater. Schlitz had spent more than a century promising customers a reliable product. It took only a few years of questionable decisions to undermine that promise. Once customers began questioning the quality, every problem reinforced their suspicions. A bad bottle was no longer an isolated incident. It became evidence that Schlitz wasn't what it used to be. Management attempted to repair the damage, but instead of rebuilding trust through transparency and product quality, Schlitz turned to advertising. The company hired the respected advertising agency Leo Burnett to create a new campaign. In the commercials, loyal Schlitz drinkers were asked what they would do if someone tried to take away their favorite beer. The responses were intended to be humorous and exaggerated. Instead, viewers found some of them strangely aggressive and threatening. People in the advertising industry gave that campaign an unofficial nickname, "Drink Schlitz or I'll kill you." In one commercial, a fictional boxer responded to the suggestion of trying another beer by threatening to put the questioner on the canvas.
You want to take away my Schlitz, my gusto? Well, I'm going to play Picasso. And put you on the canvas. You're going to be down for a count so long they're going to use a calculator. Take away my gusto.
If you don't have Schlitz, you don't have gusto. Brother, you don't have beer.
Schlitz.
In another, a rugged outdoorsman sat beside a cougar while reacting menacingly to the idea that someone might take away his Schlitz. The commercials were supposed to portray intense brand loyalty. Instead, they made Schlitz drinkers look unstable. That wasn't the message the company needed at a time when customers were already questioning the product. The campaign was pulled after approximately 10 weeks. This illustrates another important lesson. Marketing can't repair a product problem. Advertising can create awareness, it can communicate a promise, it can encourage a customer to try something, but advertising cannot indefinitely convince customers that an inferior product is still superior. If the promise made by the advertising doesn't match the customer's actual experience, the advertising may accelerate the loss of trust. While Schlitz struggled with quality and marketing, its competitors were moving forward. Miller successfully captured the emerging market for light beer with Miller Lite. Anheuser-Busch continued investing in production, distribution, and advertising. Schlitz introduced its own light beer but it never achieved the momentum of its competitors. The company that had once helped define the American beer market was now reacting to it. By the end of the 1970s, Schlitz was losing sales, market share, and valuable shelf space. The company made attempts to restore the traditional brewing process and improve the product, but recreating a recipe was easier than recreating trust. Then came another major setback. In 1981, approximately 700 employees at the Milwaukee brewery went on strike after their labor agreement expired. The strike lasted for months and further weakened a company that was already suffering from excess production capacity and serious financial problems. The strike didn't cause Schlitz's decline. By then, the company had been declining for years, but it became one of the final blows. In 1972, Schlitz had an estimated market value of approximately $1.6 billion. By 1981, with its stock trading at $11.50 per share, the company was worth only about $335 million. That represents the destruction of nearly $1.3 billion in shareholder value, a decline of approximately 79%. Although the quality crisis wasn't the only cause, it played a central role in turning one of the stock market's biggest winners into a takeover target. In 1982, the company was acquired by the Stroh Brewery Company. The beer that made Milwaukee famous was no longer being produced by an independent Milwaukee brewing company. Pabst later acquired the Schlitz brand in 1999. In 2008, it attempted to revive the beer using a version of the formula from Schlitz's more successful years. There was nostalgia and renewed interest, but the brand never returned to anything resembling its former position. This year, in 2026, Pabst halted regular production of Schlitz Premium. To mark the occasion, Wisconsin Brewing Company produced one final limited batch based on a Schlitz recipe from the late 1940s. Pabst calls the decision a hiatus rather than a permanent goodbye, leaving open the possibility that Schlitz could someday return. There's something both fitting and sad about that. To say goodbye to Schlitz, the brewers returned to the formula that existed before management began tinkering with it. So, what can entrepreneurs and business leaders learn from the collapse of Schlitz? The first lesson is that efficiency and effectiveness aren't the same thing. Schlitz found ways to produce beer faster and less expensively. Those changes were efficient. But if the result was a product customers no longer wanted, they weren't effective. Saving a few cents on production doesn't matter if you lose the customer. The second lesson is that small compromises accumulate. Businesses rarely destroy themselves with one obviously terrible decision. The damage normally occurs gradually. One cost reduction, one shortened process, one quality exception, one customer complaint that management explains away. Each compromise makes the next compromise easier to justify. Eventually, the company crosses a line, but because it arrived there one step at a time, management may not recognize how far it has moved. The third lesson is that a brand is a promise, not a logo. Schlitz still had its recognizable label. It still had a famous slogan. It still had national distribution and generations of history. But the promise inside the bottle had changed. A company doesn't own its reputation. It borrows that reputation from its customers, one transaction at a time. The fourth lesson is that past success can hide present failure. For a while, Schlitz's enormous brand recognition and distribution network protected it. People continued buying the beer because they had always bought the beer. Management could look at the sales numbers and convince itself that customers were accepting the changes. But loyal customers don't always complain before leaving. Sometimes they simply try another product and never return. By the time the decline becomes obvious in the financial statements, the real damage may have occurred years earlier. Finally, when something goes wrong, fix the product before trying to fix the perception. Schlitz couldn't advertise its way out of a quality problem. No business can. When customer experience and company messaging conflict, customer experience eventually wins. Schlitz wasn't destroyed by one competitor, one bad advertisement, one defective batch, or one labor strike. It was destroyed by an accumulation of decisions that placed production speed, cost reduction, and short-term financial performance ahead of product quality and customer trust. The company kept asking, how can we make this beer faster and more profitably? It stopped asking the more important question, Why do our customers choose Schlitz? John D. Rockefeller understood the danger of becoming overconfident after a little success. Schlitz went to sleep on a win. It had the history, the distribution, the slogan, the customers, and one of the most recognized brands in America. Then it woke up to something management never expected. Its customers no longer trusted what was inside the bottle. That's the reluctant lesson. Never confuse a cheaper process with a better business. Protect the product, respect the customer, and never allow yesterday's success to convince you that tomorrow's success is guaranteed. Because if you go to sleep on a win, you may wake up with a loss. Before we close, Schlitz is only one of the companies we've examined through the Reluctant Lessons series. In previous episodes, we've explored the successes, mistakes, and eventual failures of Blockbuster, Kodak, Toys R Us, Radio Shack, Theranos, Rubbermaid, and Boeing. Each company followed a different path, but their stories share an important truth. Business failure rarely happens without warning. The warning signs are usually there. The reluctant lesson is recognizing them before it's too late. You can find all of these episodes and much more on the Reluctant Entrepreneur podcast channel, available on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. While you're there, please subscribe or follow the podcast so you don't miss the next episode of Reluctant Lessons. Thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate you, and I'll see you again on the next episode of Reluctant Lessons.